So usually, when you look at the legacy of some great inventor or, an iconic architect, you kind of expect to see a straight logical line.
Right, like a blueprint.
Exactly, a blueprint. You identify a problem, you draft up a solution, build the thing, and then the world just moves on. But when you step into the world of our deep dive today, when you look at the source material on Richard Buckminster Fuller, that blueprint is just completely thrown out the window.
Oh, yeah, completely shredded.
Yeah. You aren't just looking at a guy who built some interesting things. You're looking at a man who embarked on this radical 50-year experiment using his own life to see if one perfectly average person could literally save the world.
And I think to really grasp the sheer scale of what he was doing, you have to realize that Fuller, who, by the way, lived from 1895 to 1983,
Yeah.
he was operating on a completely different wavelength than, well, pretty much all of his contemporaries.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, he was an American architect, a systems theorist, a futurist. But more importantly, he was popularizing these massive concepts, right? Things like sustainability, renewable energy, and resource efficiency. And he was doing this decades before those terms were even mainstream buzzwords.
Right. He was doing it when it was just like weird to talk about that stuff.
Exactly.
Mm.
He viewed the Earth as this finite, interconnected system long before the modern environmental movement even existed.
But before we can get to those grand world-saving visions, the baseline reality of the source material is that all of these ideas were born out of absolute personal devastation.
Yeah, it's really dark.
It is. To understand the inventor, we kind of have to go to the darkest moment of his entire life. So the year is 1927.
Right.
Fuller is 32 years old, and he has just hit rock bottom in, honestly, almost every conceivable way.
Oh, absolutely.
He was just fired as the president of a building company that he actually helped start. He is completely bankrupt. He is wandering the streets of Chicago, drinking heavily. And on top of all of that, he is carrying this just unimaginable grief.
Yeah, the grief is the real catalyst here.
It really is. Because 5 years earlier, in 1922, his daughter Alexandra died just before her 4th birthday from complications of polio and spinal meningitis. And the thing is, Fuller completely blamed her death on the damp, drafty living conditions of their home.
Right, and you can imagine the weight of that guilt. It's just crushing. I mean, he has lost his company, his income, and he feels entirely responsible for the loss of his child.
It's just devastating.
And winter is approaching in Chicago. He has a newborn daughter named Allegra to support now, and he has zero savings. So he actually finds himself walking along the freezing shore of Lake Michigan, seriously contemplating drowning himself.
Wow.
Yeah. In his despair, his logic, his kind of twisted logic at that point, is that if he dies, his family can at least collect his life insurance payment. They would be financially better off without him.
But he doesn't jump.
No, he doesn't.
Instead, he experiences what he later described as this almost supernatural epiphany. According to the sources, he claimed he felt as though he was suspended several feet above the ground, enclosed in this white sphere of light.
It's just such a wild
Right. And he hears a voice telling him, "You do not have the right to eliminate yourself. You do not belong to you. You belong to the universe."
Which is, I mean, that's heavy.
Seriously heavy. The voice essentially tells him that his personal significance is going to remain obscure, but he has to convert his experiences to the highest advantage of others. So, okay, let's unpack this for a second.
Sure.
Because it's a massive psychological shift. Like, if you think about it like a superhero origin story.
Right. I like where this is going.
Instead of getting bitten by a radioactive spider or something, Fuller gets bitten by the concept of radical, selfless efficiency. He decides to treat his life as an objective experiment. He literally stops thinking of himself as a standard human and starts referring to himself as Guinea Pig B, B for Bucky.
Guinea Pig B.
Yeah.
It's so strange, but so brilliant.
It's like an engineer formatting a corrupted hard drive. He wipes his ego entirely clean so he can install a brand new, flawlessly logical operating system that is dedicated entirely to the survival of the human race.
And what's really fascinating here is the sheer obsession he brought to that newly formatted hard drive, to use your analogy.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, a psychological coping mechanism to get through a dark winter.
Right, it wasn't just a phase.
No, not at all. He documented this 50-year experiment with clinical precision in a project he called the Damaction Chronophile.
The chronophile, yes.
Yeah, for the rest of his life, he kept every single letter, every receipt, every rough sketch. He logged his daily activities, sometimes in 15-minute intervals.
That sounds exhausting.
Oh, it had to be. We are talking about roughly 270 feet of paper that is now housed at Stanford University.
270 feet.
Yep. And he did all this to leave an irrefutable, completely transparent data trail. He wanted to prove exactly what one unknown, moneyless individual could do for humanity.
So how does this newly formatted Guinea Pig B actually start fixing the world?
Well, he goes straight after the issue he blamed for his daughter's death.
Right, housing and resource management. He wants to create affordable, perfectly efficient living spaces so that no one else ever has to lose a child to a drafty room.
Exactly.
And this leads him to blend the words dynamic, maximum, and tension to create his core brand and his philosophy, which is Dymaction.
Dymaction, yeah, which revolves heavily around a concept he coined called ephemeralization.
Ephemeralization, doing more with less.
Right. It's the continuous pursuit of getting the maximum advantage from the absolute minimal energy input. And he applied this directly to the Dymaction house in 1928.
And this was not your standard wooden brick home.
Oh, not even close. It looked almost like the flattened bell of a jellyfish. It was made of shiny aluminum, and it was suspended from a central mast. And the mechanics of the house were entirely focused on resource conservation.
The mechanics are what make it so brilliant, I think. Like, it was designed to be shipped anywhere in the world in just 2 cylindrical packages. The whole structure could rotate on its mast to use natural winds for cooling.
Which is so far ahead of its time for passive cooling.
Absolutely. But the bathroom is where you really see that ephemeralization at work. He designed a fine mist shower to drastically reduce water consumption.
Yeah. Oh, the fog gun shower.
Yes. And the physical mechanism there is ingenious, right? Because if you atomize water into a fine mist, you massively increase its surface area. So you can actually clean a human body using something like 90% less water and energy than a traditional shower.
It's incredible.
He wanted housing to be mobile, cheap to mass produce using like aircraft factories, and completely self-sustaining.
And he carried that exact same logic over to transportation in the early 1930s with the Dymaction car.
Yeah.
Again, doing more with less.
Right.
It was a 3-wheeled, highly aerodynamic vehicle. It had this super lightweight, crumbly steel chassis, and because it steered from a single rear wheel, it could actually turn in a tight circle on its own axis.
Like a forklift or something.
Yeah, sort of. But Fuller didn't just see it as a car. It was the ground taxiing mode of what he called an omni-medium transport.
Omni-medium, meaning it does everything.
Exactly. He eventually wanted to design it to fly, land, and drive.
I mean, looking at the photos and the source material, it literally looked like a wingless airplane just driving down the street.
Yeah.
It actually caused traffic jams just from people slowing down to stare at it because it was so bizarre.
I believe it.
And he even applied this intense efficiency to his own biology, which I find crazy, with Dymaction sleep.
Oh, right, the sleep schedule.
Yeah. He noticed that dogs and cats don't sleep for 8 hours straight. You know, they just nap when they're tired. So Fuller decided to sleep for only 30 minutes every 6 hours.
Which gave him 22 solid hours awake every single day to work.
It's insane. And he reportedly kept this grueling polyphasic schedule up for 2 whole years.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, he only stopped because his business associates were on normal human schedules, and it just became mathematically impossible to coordinate meetings with them.
That's the only reason he stopped.
Right, but it really shows the extreme lengths of that Guinea Pig B experiment. He pushed the limits of materials, of aerodynamics, and even his own nervous system just to see what was possible.
Okay, but here's where I have to push back a little bit on all of this.
Okay, go for it.
Because if we look at the actual real-world outcomes of these Dymaction inventions,
Right.
they kind of failed.
Well, yes and no.
I mean, the house only ever had 2 prototypes produced. The company went under, and the Dymaction car. Shortly after its big launch, a prototype rolled over and crashed. The driver was actually killed, and the passengers were seriously injured.
That is true. It was a tragedy.
And even though eyewitnesses said another car hit them and caused the rollover, that crash completely killed the commercial viability of the vehicle. Nobody wanted to buy it. So if the house didn't sell and the car literally crashed, wasn't Fuller really just this brilliant eccentric who was building things that were way too weird for the real world?
You know, it is really easy to look at it that way. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, commercial viability was never the metric of success for Fuller.
It wasn't.
No, not at all. He was prototyping a sustainable future. He recognized something fundamental about economics and energy long before anyone else even thought about it.
What was that?
Well, he calculated, alongside a petroleum geologist, that from the standpoint of replacement cost, meaning the solar energy input required to naturally make it petroleum, actually cost nature over $1 million per gallon. To produce?
$1 million a gallon.
Yeah,
That completely reframes how you look at pulling up to a gas station.
precisely. So burning fossil fuels for a daily commute in a heavy, inefficient steel box was, in his eyes, a catastrophic net loss for the planet. He saw humanity literally bankrupting its natural energy budget.
Wow, okay, I see.
So he wasn't trying to be the next Henry Ford selling consumer sedans. The Damaction house and car were physical hypotheses in his grand experiment. When they failed commercially or functionally, they were just data points. He logged the data, put it in the chronofile, and moved on to the next iteration of global resource efficiency.
And that next iteration leads to his most famous creation. But it actually requires a pretty surprising personal shift first.
Oh, the theater stuff.
Yeah, because up until the late 1940s, Guinea Pig B was actually quite shy. He was withdrawn. But he takes this teaching gig at Black Mountain College in North Carolina, and he gets roped into a theater production with a student named Arthur Penn.
Who, by the way, later becomes a very famous film director.
Right. And rehearsing and performing in this play totally breaks Fuller's inhibitions. He emerges as this confident, highly dynamic speaker. And with that brand new energy, he starts reinventing the geodesic dome based on a structural philosophy he called tensegrity.
Tensegrity, which is a portmanteau of tensional integrity.
Right.
You see, most traditional buildings fight gravity through compression. Heavy bricks stacked on top of heavy bricks, pushing down. But tensegrity relies on continuous tension and discontinuous compression.
Discontinuous compression, that's a mouthful.
It is. The best way to visualize this is a bicycle wheel.
Okay, right, because the thin wire spokes are in tension, they're being pulled, not pushed.
Yes. And that web of tension is so perfectly distributed that those incredibly fragile little wires can support the massive compression weight of a human riding the bike. The solid parts of a tensegrity structure don't actually need to touch each other. They are suspended within a continuous network of highly pulled cables or skins.
So it distributes the stress across the entire structure instantly, which makes it impossibly light and just insanely strong.
Exactly.
And to prove it, Fuller literally hung a bunch of college students from the framework of his early aluminum and vinyl dome, and the thing didn't budge.
Not an inch.
And soon after, the U.S. government is buying them up for radar stations. He designs the massive Montreal Biosphere for Expo 67. Domes are popping up all over the world. But looking through the sources, there's a huge historical asterisk here.
There really is, because Fuller was awarded the U.S. patents for the geodesic dome in the 1950s. But the exact same design was actually created, built, and patented 26 years earlier in Germany by a man named Dr. Walther Bauersfeld.
Wait, 26 years earlier?
Yep, for a planetarium roof. And Fuller's patent application made absolutely no mention of Bauersfeld's prior work.
Okay, so he didn't invent the raw geometry. The best analogy I can think of here is Steve Jobs and the graphical user interface.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. Because Jobs didn't invent desktop Windows or the mouse. Xerox PR did. But Jobs uniquely understood how to package it, how to popularize it, and how to weave it into this holistic worldview that completely changed computing.
And Fuller did the exact same thing with the dome.
He did.
He wove it into his broader, overarching philosophy of synergetics.
Synergetics.
Yes, which is the empirical study of systems and transformation. The core principle of synergetics is that the behavior of a whole system cannot be predicted by looking at the behavior of its isolated parts.
So like how studying sodium, which is a highly reactive metal, and chlorine, which is a toxic gas, studying those individually would never lead you to predict that combining them creates table salt, which is something totally essential for human life.
Exactly. The salt is a synergy.
Right.
That is a perfect example. Because in a tensegrity dome, testing one individual metal strut doesn't tell you anything.
Right.
It doesn't tell you that assembling 100 of them in a specific geometric web will yield this self-supporting, hurricane-proof hemisphere.
The strength comes from the connection.
Exactly. The strength emerges entirely from the relationship between the parts. So for Fuller, the dome wasn't just a clever building. It was the physical, mathematical manifestation of human cooperation.
Wow.
It proved that when individual humans link up and distribute the load, they achieve a global stability that no single person or nation could ever achieve alone.
It is such a beautiful concept, but honestly, communicating that in the 1950s and 60s without sounding like a total crackpot was a real hurdle for him.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, he's running around talking about humanity acting as a tensegrity structure. How do you get regular people to actually listen to that?
Well, he realized early on that if his physical appearance was as unconventional as his ideas, People would just focus on his quirks and they'd dismiss his math.
Right, they just write him off as a weirdo.
Exactly. So he made a highly calculated stylistic choice to become visually invisible. He intentionally dressed like, in his own words, a second-rate bank clerk.
Which is the ultimate Trojan horse strategy, if you think about it. Imagine being in a room with him. He looks like this boring, unthreatening accountant in a plain, dark suit. He sneaks right past your psychological defenses and then just starts dropping these completely mind-bending concepts.
Yeah, it was very intentional. But the quirks were still there if you paid close attention.
Like the watches.
Yes. If you looked closely at his wrists, he was wearing 3 watches at the same time. One for his office's time zone, one for the time zone he was visiting, and one for the time zone he was currently in. Because he was flying globally so often, he really viewed himself as a citizen of the planet, entirely untethered by local time.
And his use of language was just as untethered. Fuller believed that the words we use trap us in outdated ways of thinking.
The language stuff is fascinating.
It really is. He rejected the words up and down, arguing they were flat earth concepts. Instead, he wanted people to say they were going out stairs and in stairs.
Meaning moving away from or toward the gravitational center of the Earth.
Exactly. He also coined the term spaceship Earth. He pointed out that the most crucial fact about our planet is that it didn't come with an instruction manual. We have to write it ourselves.
Right.
And instead of sunrise and sunset, which, implies the sun revolves around us, he used the words sunsight and sunclips to force people to remember that we are on a sphere spinning in space.
And he also invented the word living Harry.
Yes, as the opposite of weaponry, arguing that engineering should be focused entirely on supporting life, not destroying it.
And this raises an important question about how we perceive our environment. His linguistic obsession really highlights his core belief, which is that the unthinking use of obsolete language fundamentally misleads our intuition. Well, if we talk about the world using terms from classical antiquity, we will treat the world like an infinite flat plane with infinite resources. Changing our words forces our brains to acknowledge that we are on a finite spaceship. It is the absolute first step to changing how we treat the planet and really how we treat each other.
That makes so much sense. And, when you look at the world today, with all the climate anxiety and just the general information overload, it is so easy to feel completely paralyzed.
Oh, absolutely.
But Fuller's ultimate takeaway from his 50-year experiment as Guinea Pig B is profoundly, almost aggressively optimistic. He concluded that humanity already has everything it needs.
Right now.
Right now. We have the technology, the resources, and the knowledge right now to provide a high standard of living for every single person on Earth.
He famously argued that there was no energy crisis, only a crisis of ignorance.
A crisis of ignorance.
Yeah. He approached it mathematically, proving that selfishness is unnecessary and war is obsolete. Competition for basic resources is just an outdated survival strategy based on a misunderstanding of our own technological capacity.
Wow.
If we simply apply ephemeralization, doing more with less, and embrace synergetics cooperating as a whole system, we can make the world work for 100% of humanity.
The tools are already here. We just have to choose to use them. And there is one final, truly mind-bending thought from the sources that I think perfectly encapsulates his legacy.
Oh, the carbon molecule.
Yes. So years after Fuller died, scientists were analyzing carbon, and they discovered this unique molecule made of exactly 60 carbon atoms. And when they looked at its structure under an electron microscope, they were absolutely stunned.
It's so cool.
The atoms had naturally arranged themselves into a perfect closed geometric sphere. It looked exactly like one of Fuller's geodesic domes.
Because it's the most stable, efficient distribution of tension and compression at the molecular level.
Right.
The scientific community actually named this new molecule Buckminster Fullerene.
Or the buckyball.
Or the buckyball, exactly, in his honor. And the researchers who discovered it actually won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1996.
Just think about that for a second. The fundamental microscopic building blocks of nature naturally form the exact mathematical structures that Fuller popularized in his quest to save humanity.
It gives you chills.
It really does. It's almost as if by wiping his ego clean on the shores of Lake Michigan and dedicating his life to serving the universe, he actually tapped into its hidden operating manual. It makes you wonder what other natural patterns, what other elegant solutions to our biggest problems are just waiting out there to be discovered by someone who's brave enough to step to the edge, let go of who they are, and just be a guinea pig. Until next time, keep diving deep.